is I would like you to think about one person that you work with, or one person where you can help other staff like work on this with, if that makes sense. Or if you don't work directly with people, you can sit with other people from your organization and help them think about things. So I hope everyone can like think of someone, or you can like work with someone else who's working on someone. And I'd like you to think of one of the clients that you would like to pursue some of these ideas with. Okay, just think of one person. So I'd like you to think of one person you would like them to help them have more community friends, or join a community group, or just have more connections with community members more strongly, okay? So if everybody can think of somebody, can like, what you can do, as I said, is if it means you need to sort of switch seats around, switch chairs around so you can sit with someone from your organization. What we're going to do is we're going to take, I'm not actually quite sure where it is in your handouts, but there are these sheets that look like this. If you would like to, if you like the ideas you come up with and would like to try them, or if it doesn't work out with that person, you'll have some ideas and maybe you will work with somebody else besides the person that you come up with ideas with today. So what I would like you to do is I'd like you to think of a person and then fill in. You don't have to fill in all the lines on an exercise, but if you fill in at least some of them. So the first page is what the person's interests are. So what are their things, like their interests, like music, or if it's sports, like what kind of sports? I mean, there's people, it's very important if they're baseball or soccer, right? So, or hockey, right? So what kind of sports? What are all the person's interests? Okay? Does everyone understand? Okay, so take a few minutes and figure out who you want to focus on and what their interests are. I wanted you to make sure to finish on the page 2 about the gifts, and to look at the second part on that page 2 is about what people get from knowing the person. So you may have done the first part of that page. I said you could start on what the person does well, but also make sure that that you look at the second part, what you and others receive from knowing them. What gift do you get from knowing that person? So, so I told you this morning that I would go into 7 different approaches about connecting people with community members. So there's 7 different strategies. Some of them apply to one type of person. Some of them won't apply to someone. But I'm going to kind of go through them so you know the strategies for everybody and that you can use them in the future. The overall question about all of them is where are the opportunities? Do you want to sit down? I'm okay right now, thank you. So the overall question is, where are the opportunities for relationships? And who are they going to get to know there? Remember, so the whole question about thinking about people instead of just activities. So there's 2 strategies about connecting people through their interests and gifts. There's 2 strategies about connecting with individual community members, one-to-one, and then there's 3 strategies that are about how can we increase community membership and belonging. So in the first one, about who would appreciate receiving this person's gifts, I'm going to tell you this story. This is a story about Larry. What's the story? Larry was someone who had quadriplegia, cerebral palsy, right? He didn't walk. He also didn't talk, so he doesn't use words to talk. He had lived in a facility that had 64 beds, a residential facility that had 64 beds, and for medically fragile, what was called medically fragile people. And that place had closed, and then he lived in a small home with 4 people. What do you call that? Shared living? No. Okay, so in a bed with a place with 4 people. So he went to a workshop where there was a lot of people like him, a lot of people with very complex medical issues, people who didn't walk, people who didn't talk. If you walk in, there's a lot of people with very complicated wheelchairs or people lying on mats. So this was the kind of place where he went during the day, and they were very committed, though, to each and every person having community relationships. So the director of the program was very committed to people having direct relationships. So they structured things that way. They talked about it in their staff meetings every week. So this was the place where he went. Now, Larry had a particular gift, which is he had a gift for screaming. He could scream really well, really loudly. He could be out on the street, and we could hear him in here. He had an extraordinary gift for screaming. And he also liked it when people played games with a ball. So if people were playing a game with a ball, he would light up. He was very happy when he was watching people play a game with a ball. He also, liked music. Music calmed him down. So because the organization was very committed to this, the staff were brainstorming ideas with each other. And they started to see things. They started to have on the glasses of seeing the opportunities in the community. They started to see community members differently, or places where people could be connected. They started to put on those glasses of seeing those particular places. So one of the staff there, her name was Kim. She had a community center, like a community recreation center. And one day she was walking through and she saw this group of older men, this older man playing volleyball. Sorry, should be much more focused than that. But that's all right. So she saw this group of semi-retired men playing volleyball, and she said, oh, this is a group where we could connect Larry. So they started bringing Larry there. The men played on Thursday mornings, but they did not just bring him there as an activity. The staff started really looking for the other end of the relationship. So which were the men that were more interested in Larry? Which were the ones that were more friendly to him? Which ones asked about him if he missed a particular Thursday? So, and then they thought about what could they invite the men to do to get to know him better, like asking what could they invite them to do. So they asked them they would like to go to a basketball game, or basketball team, the Timberwolves, if they'd like to go to a game with Larry. And they accepted, and they arranged to go to the basketball game with him. This is their team photo, and the men insisted that Larry be in their team photo. 2 or 3 of the men also started, after the game, they started to have lunch with Larry after the game every Thursday. They call Larry their #1 fan. They gave him this volleyball that says #1 fan. And also his sweatshirt also says #1 fan. So they also gave him the sweatshirt. And at the end of the volleyball season, they made sure that Larry knew where they were playing softball. They made sure Larry knew where they were playing softball at the end of the volleyball season. And then there's a story about them. This is in a suburb of Minneapolis. There's a town called Edina is the suburb, and they have this little magazine called About Town, and there was a story about them in this magazine. You might see a bunch of senior jocks playing volleyball with the kind of enthusiasm and vigor you won't often see, even in the summertime sand pits at Lake Calhoun. That's a place where younger people play. Now you go down here. You might also see on the sidelines an avid observer whose vicarious participation in the action is so genuinely intense that at times you think he'll launch himself right out of his wheelchair and onto the court. Kim knew how much Larry enjoyed the sound of a bouncing ball. One Thursday morning, she took Larry to watch the senior guys play. If he would rather have been watching the Olympic team, that fact would not have been detectable in his beaming demeanor along the sidelines. Then here. Soon the Thursday ritual was not the same without Larry. Whenever he couldn't make a game, the team felt his absence. As one player put it, he cheers for everybody, not just for who's winning. If you're having a lousy day on the court, he still makes you feel good because he just loves to watch us play. So this is a place where his gift for screaming is appreciated. Yes? So his gift there is like really appreciated. So thank you. So this is an example of that approach about who would appreciate receiving this person's gifts. So if you go to the next page in your sheets, there's a sheet that says approach #1. If you go down there, so go to approach #1. You don't have to watch all the slides as I go through them. So I have all kinds of examples, right? So, okay. So there we go. All right. So that's like, so if you look at the person's gifts that you wrote down on page 2, and then go to page 3, it's like who would appreciate receiving this person's gifts. You could just jot down any ideas that you had. If you looked at the gifts on page 2. The next approach is to think about where are all the community places where people engage in one of this person's interests. Where would you find someone who shared the person's interest? So this is a disciplined approach to not think about the clients. Don't think about the client, but you think about an interest. and you just think about an interest like sports or horses or pubs, and then you brainstorm where are all the places where someone does something with that interest. So here's an example with cars. This is an example with all kinds of things about cars, where people make cars and fix cars and auto magazines, and you have this example in your handouts in Czech, I'm pretty sure. And so so if you look at your first page and you pick one interest, and then look at this approach 2 and think about where are all the places where someone does, let me give you a couple of examples. This woman in the middle here was very challenging because she didn't seem interested in very much. And so the staff had to think about it. There was only one thing. She went to church. She went to church services, but they wanted her to be more a part of the church, more relationships at the church. And so they said one of the things that Cecilia really liked, the one thing that really meant the most to her, was to dress up and look pretty. And what they found at the church was they found the church beautification club. So to make the church more pretty, yes? So these two ladies on either side are the chair and the co-chair of the church beautification club. And they helped her join that group at church. Oops, I hit the wrong one again. So go to your second page. Go to your second page, approach 2, and think about one interest. Where are all the places anyone does something with that interest? Okay. Look and see if you know anyone at those places. Like, do you know someone, have a connection, a personal connection at one of those places in either approach 1 or 2? Does one of you know someone that you could talk to? It's fine if you don't, but just look and see, and put the person's name down for a minute if you do know, if you have a connection. So those are 2 approaches about connecting through gifts and interests. And now we're looking at 2 approaches about connecting one-to-one with people. So the third approach might be very useful for many of the people that you support. So the third approach is thinking about who are the people who are already acquaintances. So who are already there. Like if we did a relationship map, they would be on the outer circle, people that there might be on the outer circle. And you could think about, you could ask them to get to know the person better. You could invite them to do something. So Larry with the volleyball team, they asked if they'd like to go to a game with Larry, yes? So I'm gonna tell you a little story about someone at the same place as Larry with the volleyball team. I told you many of the people there had very severe physical handicaps, very severe medical problems. And one of the people there, his name was Stephen. And if you thought about how did Stephen want to spend his day, it was lying on a mat and not doing anything. He didn't talk. People did not understand how much he understood about anything that was going on. He was very profoundly handicapped. So, but I told you the place where this agency was very committed to connect people. And they really started looking and started developing ideas. And the staff there took him to get his hair cut once a month. And the staff who took him noticed that the barber seemed to really like Stephen, seemed to really like Stephen. And so they asked the barber if he would like to get to know Stephen better. And they asked him if he would like to, they invited him to have lunch once a month. So like we said, we all get to know people better by inviting them to do things. So they invited him to have lunch at least once a month with Stephen. So the barber accepted, and they started. And then he said he was not getting to know Stephen well enough. He said they needed to have lunch at least twice a month. So this barber got an award, actually a friendship award, from a professional association I belonged to. And I saw him get his award. And he said something very important to me, because sometimes people will say to me about people like Stephen, they'll say, oh, Stephen isn't interested in people. He doesn't care about being connected. He's not interested in that kind of thing. And so people will say things to me about certain people. But I learned something very important from the barber, because the barber, he was talking to a group of bigger than this group. He was talking to about 100 people. And I always like to tell people the barber was a plain old middle-aged man. He was balding. He had a little pot belly, just a plain old regular guy. And he was getting this award in front of about 100 people. Excuse me. And when he was getting the award, he started to cry about how important his relationship with Stephen was to him. And he said something very important. He said, I don't know what Stephen's getting out of this, because Stephen doesn't talk. But he said, but it's important to me. And when he said that it's important to me, I really came to understand that maybe one of the most important things we can do is help people like the barber get to know people like Stephen. Maybe that's one of the most important things that we can do. Certainly in the community model, yes, right. That's one of the most important things we can do. And people say to me all the time, we have to educate our community, or we have to build community awareness. But I think that's the best education, or the best awareness that there is for one person like the barber to get to know one person like Stephen. Okay, so maybe that's the most important thing we can do. So on your worksheet, on approach 3, it says, where are the places where the person goes now, the community places where the person goes, and then who are the community members that are there? If you go with the person there, you might know, it might be you haven't paid attention to who's that woman, what's that man's name? So, but you can start seeing, you can pay attention to that. If you don't go with the person, you could ask the staff who do go with the person, or if the person talks for themselves, you can ask the person themselves, who do you like there? We had a young man with autism. He wasn't very social, and he went to church services with his family. And the family asked him, they were in a project we were in, and the family asked him, who did he like at church? And he said, the man with the long hair and the vest. That's who he wanted to get to know better. And so they invited him actually to have lunch after the church services with them to get to know him better. So if there's a specific person, and then what could you ask them to do? What would make sense? So see if you can spend a few minutes on that on that one, okay? On approach 3. See what you come up with.